Donald Trump supporters are right there with him. Even as his rhetoric has become more blatantly fascist, they want what he wants. In the past year, Trump has called for the termination of the Constitution, said he wants to be dictator for a day, and echoed language used by Hitler when claiming that immigrants are, quote, poisoning the blood of our country. In fact, take a look at this. A poll conducted this month by CBS News and YouGov found that 82% of Republican registered voters agree with that latter statement. Trump has fundamentally transformed the Republican Party to the point that the party itself has taken on his grievances and the agenda of vengeance that he's openly planning if he wins a second term. The MAGA base has backed Trump through every one of his norm-shattering scandals, and it now appears that they see themselves as intrinsically linked with the former president to the point of no return. As Tom Nichols wrote in The Atlantic this week, quote, these voters now want to get even with their fellow citizens, not for what's been done to Trump, but for what they feel has been done to them. They were certain that 2016 would finally bring them the recognition and respect they craved. Instead, Trump set them up for a steady diet of ego-bruising rebukes from other voters. Joining me now is Tom Nichols, staff writer for The Atlantic, professor emeritus at the U.S. Naval War College, and author of the book Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. Also with us is the former Republican strategist Matthew Dowd. He's a senior MSNBC political analyst and author of the book A New Way, Embracing the Paradox as We Lead and Serve. Good morning to you, gentlemen. Thank you both for being with us. Tom, I've been reading with great interest some of your analysis on this, from which I've just quoted. And as you said in that quote that I just read in the introduction, Donald Trump supporters, I don't know if the right word is, have adopted his grievances or are feeling embraced by his grievance and his thirst for vengeance. And I want to ask you a little bit about that, the chicken and the egg here about grievance and vengeance.
You know, one of the strange things about the Trump era is that a lot of the complaints of Trump's voters became self-fulfilling prophecies. That if you talk to Trump voters in 2015, 2016, as he was running the first time, they would say that, well, you know, we're looked down upon, or the culture doesn't respect us. And of course, that resulted in these endless inane safaris to diners and gas stations, and you know, the futile attempt to understand the Trump voter. What happened after voting for Trump twice and supporting him even as he threatens to become a dictator, after January 6th, after all of his horrendous behavior, after the E. Jean Carroll trial still ongoing, they've turned it into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes, there are a lot of people who look down on them for what they're supporting. A lot of ordinary, normal Americans who would never think to support a man who's been found liable for rape, who talks about his fellow citizens as vermin. And so Trump voters are saying, why are you looking down on us? Why are you judging us? As if there weren't perfectly good reason to do that. So it's now come full circle that the anti-establishment candidate has dragged his voters into the sewers with him, and they've decided that they have, after years of doubling down, that they simply have to accept it and revel in it and claim that this is what they wanted all along.
So Matthew, this becomes self-fulfilling after a while, right? If the idea is that we lack empathy or people lack empathy and are talking down to these folks who, as Tom said, perhaps should have a different reaction to things, we're not getting closer to a solution. What do you do with this? Because I think many years ago, one could understand some degree of grievance, but after all that Donald Trump has done, it is perplexing to the rest of us as to why his support gets stronger amongst this group.
Yeah, you know, as I listen to this, it's kind of like the Festivus era, right? It's not just one day of grievances, it's every day is a day of grievance in the course of this. And I would also, to understand this, I also think is, yes, Donald Trump has been part of precipitating this, but I actually think he's probably more of a revealer than a causer of this. And I think Donald Trump revealed what was existing in American politics. The reason why Donald Trump won in 2016 wasn't because he caused the Republican Party to become what it has become, is that he revealed a part of the Republican Party, and a large part of the Republican Party is that wanted to be stayed in this grievance era of this. And I would remind folks that Sarah Palin in 2008, when she ran with John McCain, who was kind of the pre-Trump Trump in the way she talked and the way she talked about things, she drew larger crowds than John McCain. And that was 8 years before Donald ran and won in this office. And so I think in order to do something about it, we have to understand that's the current state of the Republican Party. And Donald Trump, just removing Donald Trump from the equation is not going to solve the problem.
Tom, let's explore that a little bit. Let's talk about sort of the two pillars right now of Donald Trump's appeal. One is this savior thing, right? That I am doing this for you. I am standing between them and you. I am being prosecuted so that you're not prosecuted, which makes zero sense because nobody else would be prosecuted for things that Donald Trump did. And then there is this deep-seated grievance, which you wrote about. That is this adopted by people, or is this there and we have to do a better job of figuring it out, you know, how you run a country when you have some large percentage of the population with deep-seated grievances?
The strongest political force in the world right now is resentment, is deep-seated and mostly emotional and irrational resentment. And Trump, I think Matthew has a good point here. Trump tapped into that. He kind of mined that as a very rich vein of political support among people who hadn't kind of put into words this sort of itching feeling of inferiority and this sort of sense of being outsiders, even though, ironically, the Republicans, as Trump went into 2016, were probably the most powerful they'd ever been. They achieved unified national government by then. They controlled a majority of elected seats across the country. But Trump's voters had a beef with the culture, which they felt wasn't their culture, that it didn't respect them. And it created this kind of itching, writhing sense of dissatisfaction that they needed to express somehow. And Trump, who's one genius. He's an incredibly ignorant person, but he is a genius at marketing, and he marketed that brilliantly. But I don't think there's much to be done about it now. You can't really reason people out of that. Some people will naturally just kind of recover from it. But the idea that somehow we can go out there and like talk to these voters and say, okay, once and for all, what is it that we can do for you? They don't want you to do anything for them. They want this chaos. They want the anger and the complete constitutional mess and danger that Trump wants to create. And part of it, and I'll just go back to Matt's comment about Sarah Palin. Part of it is people want a TV show. They don't want to be bored. Trump is fun. He's interesting to them. And Joe Biden's boring, and they want life to be like TV, unfortunately.
So, Matthew, I think Tom's entirely right that the most potent political force in the world right now is resentment and some form of grievance. But how can we all be saying there's no potential solution to this, and who solves it? If it's not going to come from us trying to figure out what will bring these folks around, and I think Tom might be right about that. Who does? Who fixes this? I mean, at some point, do we lose to resentment and grievance?
Well, we fix it. I mean, in the end, we as people fix this problem in this and how we treat one another, how we engage with one another. And I get the level of hatred and the level of vitriol that all of us face if we're having any conversation in a rational way in this era right now, because Tom's exactly right. You can't reason somebody out of an emotional connection. And these voters have an emotional connection to this grievance and to Donald Trump. And you're not going to be able to give them the 10 logical points of why they shouldn't. At some point, I believe we have to make the argument that yes, you have a grievance, but Donald Trump has no respect for you. Donald Trump as a placeholder for your grievance and anger. He doesn't care about you. He has no respect for you. He looks down on you. And I think the only way is one person, one community, one avenue at a time in how we engage and how we treat one another in this, because the problem of answering a grievance that they have with a grievance that another side has is only going to make the problem worse. And then Martin Luther King talked about this. Everybody in history has talked about this. You can't answer hate and anger with more hate and anger because it only implodes.
Gentlemen, thank you for kicking us off this morning. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all the time and thought that you've given to this seemingly intractable issue. Tom Nichols is a staff writer at The Atlantic and the author of the Atlantic Daily Newsletter. He's also the author of the book, Our Own Worst Enemy, The Assault from Within on Modern Democracy. Matthew Dowd is a senior MSNBC political analyst and a former Republican strategist and author of